Arrogant lecturer forced a simple woman to solve a hard problem as a joke. The room fell into silence. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Jessica Green, a simple woman, had just entered the university lecture hall. She wasn't a student, nor was she there to study. She was there with her husband, Michael, who was a guest speaker that day. Jessica had always been humble and avoided attention, preferring to blend into the background. Her brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and she wore a simple sweater and jeans, the kind of outfit that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. She had no intention of making waves. As she quietly sat in the back, watching her husband speak with colleagues, the atmosphere in the room seemed calm until Professor Michael Harris stepped up to the front. Known for his brilliant mind and sharp tongue, Harris was the kind of professor who prided himself on challenging the brightest minds. He wasn't used to being questioned and had a reputation for dismissing those he deemed less intelligent. The students looked up to him, and his lectures were always filled with praise from his followers. But he didn't realize that today, a challenge would come from an unexpected place. When the lecture began, Professor Harris made a comment about a particularly complex problem that was famously difficult to solve. "This problem," he said, "is beyond most of you. It's the kind of thing that only the most advanced minds can understand. But don't worry, we won't be tackling it today. Perhaps one day you'll be ready." His voice was smooth, filled with authority. But then, something caught his eye. Jessica, sitting quietly in the back row, had pulled out her notebook and was scribbling something down. It wasn't unusual for someone to take notes during his lecture, but something about her calm demeanor sparked a thought in his mind. Perhaps this will be a good opportunity to have some fun, he thought. Let's see if this woman, who clearly doesn't belong in my class, can solve this. He turned toward her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Miss, I see you're taking notes. Care to come up here and show us how you would solve this impossible problem?" "Just for fun, of course," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The students around her began to giggle, clearly expecting her to fail. Jessica hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of their eyes on her. But something inside her shifted. She had no intention of backing down. Her mind was already racing through the solution, a solution she had been quietly working on in her spare time. With a deep breath, she stood up, her heart pounding as she made her way to the front of the class. As she walked to the board, she could feel the eyes of everyone on her, some curious, some mocking. But she was determined. She knew this problem, and she wasn't going to let anyone undermine her. Jessica took the marker, her hand steady. She glanced at the problem on the board, then began to write down the steps, each one precise and calculated. The room had fallen silent, the only sound being the faint scratching of the marker on the board. Jessica's movements were smooth, her confidence growing with each step as she solved the problem. The students had stopped laughing. Some looked at each other in confusion, others with dawning respect. Even Professor Harris, who had originally expected her to falter, was now watching with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. The problem was complex, but Jessica handled it effortlessly, each step a testament to her hidden skill. When she finished, she stepped back and looked at the class. The silence was deafening. No one knew what to say. The problem had been solved with ease, and the woman they had all underestimated had proven them wrong. Professor Harris stood frozen for a moment, his pride wounded. He had expected to humiliate her, but instead, she had humiliated him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The class was still, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. But the only sound in the room was Jessica's steady breathing. She didn't look for recognition. She didn't need it. She had already proven her point. The room remained quiet, and for the first time, Professor Harris found himself speechless. The once confident and arrogant lecturer was left stunned, while Jessica stood there, a quiet smile on her face, knowing that sometimes, the most unexpected people hold the greatest talents. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Jessica Green stood there, the marker still in her hand, looking out at the faces of her classmates, all of whom were now frozen in stunned silence. She didn't look for recognition or validation. She didn't need it. Her mind, focused only on solving the problem, had already left the noise of mockery behind. All that mattered now was the equation in front of her and the calm satisfaction of completing it with ease. Professor Michael Harris, the man who had dared to challenge her, was still standing at the front, his mouth slightly agape, eyes wide with disbelief. The students, too, seemed at a loss for words, many still trying to process what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just the complexity of the problem that had amazed them, it was how effortlessly Jessica had tackled it. It was as if the answer had been waiting for her all along, and she had simply unlocked it. It had taken her only minutes to solve a problem that the most advanced students in the class had struggled with for weeks. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and yet, here she was, standing tall, the only one in the room who truly understood what was going on. The silence stretched on, thick with tension, until finally, Michael Harris seemed to find his voice again. He cleared his throat, looking around the room as if searching for something to say. "Well," he began, his voice unsteady, I must admit, that was unexpected." His usual authoritative tone was now laced with uncertainty. "I guess I underestimated you, Miss Green." The students exchanged uncertain glances, some looking at Jessica with newfound respect, others still in shock. Michael continued, his pride visibly wounded, though he tried to mask it. "You've certainly proven me wrong. You're a natural, aren't you?" Jessica didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, still holding the marker, her face a mask of calm composure. She had no need to gloat or make a scene. The truth was already out there. She had done what no one had expected, and in doing so, she had shown them all that appearances could be deceiving. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady and unwavering. "But this problem wasn't beyond anyone here. It just required a little focus and determination." She placed the marker down on the board and stepped back, her movements graceful and deliberate. The students were slowly starting to recover from the shock, murmuring among themselves, trying to process the reality of what had just occurred. Jessica turned away from the board, her eyes briefly meeting Michael's, and she could see that his usual confidence had faltered. "You were right about one thing," she added, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "It does take a special kind of person to solve problems like these." Michael blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. But Jessica didn't wait for him to say anything else. She knew that the moment had passed. The lesson had been learned not just by Michael, but by everyone in that room. It was a lesson about humility, about never underestimating someone based on their appearance or background. Jessica had proven that her worth wasn't defined by her simple attire or the job she held. She had shown them all that anyone, no matter their station in life, could achieve greatness if given the chance. As she walked back to her seat, Jessica felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done what needed to be done, not for recognition, but to prove to herself that she was more than the label others tried to put on her. The class slowly began to settle back into their routines, the tension lifting from the air, though many still couldn't shake the image of Jessica standing at the board, solving an impossible problem with ease. Michael, for his part, stood silently at the front of the room, still processing the turn of events. His reputation as a lecturer, once untouchable, had been shaken. And for the first time, he realized that there were people in the world whose talents couldn't be measured by the standards he had set. As the class continued, no one spoke of the incident again, but the change was palpable. Jessica had made her mark. And while Michael would likely never forget the lesson he had learned that day, it was Jessica who would carry the quiet confidence that comes from proving not only others wrong, but also herself. Right. As the class went on, Jessica found herself returning to a sense of normalcy. The tension from earlier still lingered, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, one that had come from the moment she had stepped up to the board and shown them all what she was capable of. The whispers that followed her now were not mocking, instead, they were filled with curiosity, respect, and even admiration. No one could deny that something remarkable had happened that day. Jessica sat quietly in her seat, still processing the events that had just unfolded. She had known that she was capable, but there was something different about the way she had proven it, something about doing it in front of a room full of people who had once doubted her. It was a validation she didn't realize she needed. Michael Harris, on the other hand, was still trying to regain his composure. His usual confident demeanor had been shaken to the core. As the lecture continued, he found himself distracted, his mind replaying the moment when Jessica had solved the problem with such grace and precision. He had underestimated her, and that was a mistake he couldn't easily forget. The students, too, seemed to be grappling with the aftermath of what had happened. Some had been silent, their eyes following Jessica as she sat back down. Others were deep in conversation, perhaps processing what they had just witnessed. But no one seemed to be able to shake the image of Jessica standing at the board, solving the problem that had stumped everyone else. Michael finally turned his attention back to the class, though it was clear that his thoughts were elsewhere. His usual sharpness was dulled, and his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Let's move on," he said, trying to steer the class back to the topic at hand. "We still have a lot to cover today." But the energy in the room had shifted. It was no longer just a lecture, it had become a turning point. For some of the students, it was a moment of self-reflection. They had witnessed the power of humility, and the strength that could come from someone who was often overlooked. Jessica had shown them that greatness didn't always come from what you wore or how you presented yourself. Sometimes, it came from within. As the class continued, Jessica remained quiet. But her presence was undeniable. She no longer felt the need to prove herself. She had already done that, not through words, but through her actions. And in doing so, she had earned something far more valuable than recognition, she had earned respect. Michael, too, seemed to realize this. His own respect for Jessica, though unspoken, was evident in the way he treated her from that moment on. The way he interacted with the other students changed. He was less dismissive, more attentive. The arrogance that had once defined him seemed to fade, replaced by something more genuine, more thoughtful. It was a lesson, one that would stay with both him and the students long after the class had ended. For Jessica, the lesson was simpler, but no less profound. She didn't need validation from anyone. She had always known her worth, but sometimes, it took a moment like this to remind her of it. And that was enough. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the class, Jessica packed up her things, feeling lighter than she had when she entered. She had come in expecting nothing more than to quietly support her husband. But today, she had left with something far more meaningful, something that would stay with her forever, the quiet but powerful knowledge that she was more than capable, more than enough, and no one could take that from her. As the days went by, things at the university slowly returned to normal, but for Jessica Green, something had shifted. The quiet woman who had once preferred to remain invisible now walked the halls with a newfound confidence. No longer just the supportive wife of a guest speaker, she had proven herself in front of the most challenging audience. Her mind, however, stayed focused on her true passion, mathematics. She spent her evenings at home, solving complex equations and reading through advanced textbooks, not for anyone else, but for her own love of the subject. The victory she had achieved in that lecture hall was not just about solving a difficult problem, it was about finally stepping into her own. Michael Harris, the once self-assured professor, had noticed the shift as well. He had tried to shake off the humbling experience, but it lingered with him. He was not used to being proven wrong, especially not in such a public manner. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning his approach to teaching, his assumptions about intelligence, and the way he had dismissed people based on their appearances. He wasn't the type of man to admit when he was wrong, but he couldn't help but feel a deep respect for Jessica. She had shown him that talent could come from unexpected places, and that intelligence wasn't always something that could be measured by the standards he had set. Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself interacting with his students differently. He asked more questions, encouraged more participation, and really listened to the answers. His lectures were no longer about proving how smart he was, they were about helping others reach their potential, just as Jessica had done that day. For Jessica, life returned to its normal rhythm. She continued to support her husband in his work, but she no longer felt the need to stay in the shadows. She had gained something far more valuable than approval. She had gained respect, both from others and from herself. One afternoon, while having coffee with a friend, Jessica was asked about the lecture. "I'm sure the class was impressed with you," her friend said. Jessica smiled softly, her eyes thoughtful. "It wasn't about impressing anyone," she replied. "It was about showing myself that I could do it. And maybe, just maybe, helping others see that no one should be underestimated." Her words carried a quiet wisdom that had come from the experience, and her friend, who had always admired Jessica's humility, nodded in understanding. Jessica didn't need to brag or boast about her achievements. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Michael Harris, though a man of pride, had learned that lesson as well. He never forgot the moment when Jessica stood at that board and solved the problem. It had been a turning point for both of them, though neither of them fully realized it at the time. In the end, it wasn't just about one woman proving her worth. It was about two people, one who had been humbled, and one who had finally come into her own, learning that true greatness comes from within, not from the expectations others place on us. As the semester ended, Jessica Green was no longer the quiet, unassuming woman who had walked into that lecture hall. She was a woman who had proven her worth, not just to the world, but to herself. And that, she knew, was enough. As the weeks went by, Jessica's life continued in a way that felt more fulfilling than ever before. She had returned to her quiet routine, but now there was a sense of pride in everything she did. The validation she had received that day in Michael's lecture hall had shifted something deep inside her. No longer just the supportive wife, she was now confident in her own abilities. She continued to dive deeper into her passion for mathematics, solving problems at night and reading books that challenged her. It wasn't just about proving anything to anyone else anymore, it was about personal growth. Her husband, Michael, continued his career, but his interactions with Jessica were different. He had changed in ways he couldn't quite explain, and he found himself reflecting more on his own approach to teaching. No longer was he so quick to dismiss others based on their appearances. He had learned something valuable from Jessica: real talent wasn't always visible on the surface. One afternoon, as Jessica worked on another complex problem in the quiet of their home, Michael walked into the room and observed her. There was a sense of wonder in his gaze. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about that day in class. What you did, it was impressive." Jessica looked up from her work, a soft smile on her lips. "It wasn't about impressing anyone, Michael," she replied. "I just did what I know how to do. But sometimes, you have to show people that what they see isn't all there is." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I've been thinking about that a lot," he confessed. "It's easy to overlook people, to assume that you know what they're capable of. But you show me that there's always more beneath the surface." Jessica paused, letting his words sink in. She wasn't interested in being a pedestal for praise. She simply wanted him to understand the value of seeing people for who they truly were, not just what they appeared to be. "I think we all need reminders like that," she said, her voice calm and measured. Michael smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "I'll never forget it," he said. The conversation was brief, but it carried a depth that made Jessica feel understood. Michael had come a long way from the arrogant professor he once was. His humility, gained through his interactions with Jessica, was something he carried into his teaching. The next time he addressed his class, it was with a new sense of openness. He was more willing to listen, to value his students' perspectives, and to acknowledge that everyone had something valuable to contribute. For Jessica, life carried on in its simple yet meaningful way. She didn't seek recognition for the work she did, whether it was solving equations late into the night or working alongside her husband to support his business. What mattered most was the peace she found in herself, the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing her own worth. And as the months passed, Jessica's confidence only grew. She began to make her own mark, not in the academic world, but in the hearts and minds of those around her. People began to see her differently, no longer as just Michael's wife, but as a woman who had carved out her own space in the world. One day, at a community event hosted by her husband's company, Jessica was approached by a colleague of Michael's. The woman had heard of Jessica's talents and wanted to know more about her work with mathematics. "You know," the woman said, "Michael has always spoken highly of you, but I never realized how much you've done. You really are something special." Jessica smiled softly, the compliment warm but not unexpected. She had learned long ago not to seek validation from others. Instead, she relied on her own understanding of her worth. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "But honestly, I'm just doing what I love. It's not about being special, it's about being true to yourself." And in that moment, Jessica realized that the world had begun to see her for who she truly was, not because she had to prove anything to anyone, but because she had finally stopped hiding her light. She had stepped into her own, and the world around her had no choice but to notice. Months had passed since that unforgettable day in Michael's class, but Jessica Green's life had changed in ways she never imagined. It wasn't just about the recognition she had received or the respect that followed, though that had been rewarding. It was about the internal transformation, the quiet confidence that now radiated from her every action. She no longer felt the need to stay in the shadows. She had learned that she could be seen, truly seen, for who she was, and that was enough. Michael, too, had found himself evolving. His teaching style had softened, his approach more inclusive, his respect for his students growing. He didn't see them as obstacles to his own brilliance anymore. He saw them as individuals, each with their own potential, and he encouraged them to tap into it. As the months went on, Jessica's newfound sense of self spread beyond the walls of their home. She started speaking at local community events, sharing her love for mathematics, helping others who had been overlooked or underestimated, just as she had once been. Her story resonated with so many people, especially women who felt they didn't belong in certain spaces. Jessica became a quiet advocate for those who needed the reminder that they, too, had value, that their potential wasn't defined by others' limited perspectives. One evening, after a particularly moving talk at a local high school, Jessica was approached by a young woman named Ellie. "I just wanted to thank you for speaking today," Ellie said shyly. "You've given me the courage to apply to college, even though I don't think I'm good enough. I've always been told I'm not smart enough to succeed, but now I'm starting to believe I can." Jessica smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Ellie," she said, her voice warm and steady, "you are more than enough. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just be true to yourself." Ellie's eyes filled with tears, and Jessica knew, in that moment, that her own journey had helped light the way for someone else. It was a humbling realization. It wasn't just about solving math problems anymore. It was about solving the problem of self-doubt, helping others see the strength within themselves. Back at home, Michael sat in the living room, reviewing some papers for work when Jessica entered, her face glowing from the energy of her talk. She had the same calm confidence she had always carried, but now it was different, it was unmistakably hers. "You know, I'm proud of you," Michael said, setting his papers aside. Jessica raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "For what?" she asked, genuinely curious. "For everything," Michael replied. "For being you. For showing everyone that it's not about what you wear or where you come from. It's about what you're capable of." Jessica's heart swelled with gratitude, but she didn't say much. She didn't need to. The quiet understanding between them spoke volumes. They had both changed in ways they never anticipated. Michael had learned the value of humility, and Jessica had learned that her voice, her talents, and her experiences had the power to shape the world around her. That evening, as they sat together, quietly reflecting on the path they had both walked, Jessica realized that the true reward was not in the recognition, but in the lives she had touched, and in the person she had become. The world had underestimated her, but that was no longer her problem. It was theirs. As Jessica continued to grow in confidence, the ripple effect of her actions spread further than she could have imagined. Her reputation, once rooted in her quiet demeanor, was now defined by her strength, her brilliance, and the humility she carried with her. She was no longer just Michael's wife, she was her own person, and she was determined to use her talents to make a difference. One afternoon, Jessica received an unexpected invitation. It was from a prestigious university, one that she had never considered applying to. They had heard about her achievements, about the woman who had solved an impossible problem and changed the dynamics of an entire classroom. The invitation was to attend a symposium, to speak on a panel about the importance of self-confidence in academic success. At first, Jessica hesitated. The idea of speaking at such an event felt daunting. But as she thought about it, she realized that this was another opportunity not just for herself, but for others who might need to hear her story. So, she accepted. The day of the symposium, Jessica stood in front of a room full of academics, students, and professionals. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but they didn't overwhelm her. Instead, they fueled her. As she walked onto the stage, she was greeted by applause. The same people who had once overlooked her now recognized her as a force in her field. The panel began, and one by one, the speakers shared their insights. When it was Jessica's turn, she spoke not about formulas or equations, but about the journey she had taken to find her voice. She talked about the challenges of being underestimated, about the quiet moments when she doubted herself, and about the strength it took to stand up, not just to others, but to her own insecurities. It's not about fitting into someone else's idea of who you should be, Jessica said, her voice steady and confident. It's about embracing who you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Her words resonated with the audience. She could see the nods of understanding, the glances exchanged between people who knew exactly what she meant. She had been there, too, feeling like she didn't belong, like she wasn't enough. But now, she knew better. And that knowledge, that sense of self-worth, was something that no one could take away from her. After the panel, people came up to Jessica to thank her for sharing her story. Among them was a young woman who had attended the symposium just to hear Jessica speak. "Your story," the woman said, her voice filled with emotion, "it's exactly what I needed to hear. I've always been told I wasn't smart enough to pursue my dreams. But after listening to you, I believe I can." Jessica smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond any recognition she had ever received. "You can," she replied. "You've always been able to. You just need to believe in yourself." As she left the symposium that day, Jessica felt a quiet pride in what she had accomplished. She hadn't just spoken about mathematics or academic achievements. She had spoken about something far more powerful, the ability to overcome self-doubt and to embrace who you truly are. And in that moment, she realized that this was just the beginning. There was so much more she could do, not for anyone else's approval, but for herself and for those whose lives she could touch along the way. Michael, too, had noticed the change in her. They had both grown, not just as individuals, but as a couple. They had learned to support each other in ways that went beyond the surface, and it had strengthened their relationship. "I'm proud of you," he said one evening as they sat together. "You've come so far." Jessica looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "You helped me see my own worth." Michael smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "And you helped me see mine." They sat in silence for a moment, both content with the journey they had shared, and the future that awaited them. They had learned that true success wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about understanding your own value and never settling for less than you deserve. As time passed, Jessica continued to embrace her newfound confidence, but she never let it define her. She remained humble, knowing that true strength came not from recognition, but from the quiet power of being true to oneself. Her life, once centered around blending into the background, now felt like it was unfolding with purpose, but she knew that her journey was not just about personal growth, it was about helping others see their own worth, too. Michael, still by her side, had become her greatest ally. His support, not just as a husband, but as someone who had witnessed her growth firsthand, was invaluable. He had seen the quiet woman who once questioned her place in the world transform into a confident, self-assured individual. One afternoon, as they sat together on their porch, enjoying the warmth of the setting sun, Michael spoke up. "I've been thinking about the impact you've had," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've changed so many lives, Jessica. I see it in the way people look at you now. They respect you." Jessica smiled softly, not because of the praise, but because she knew he understood. "It's not about the respect, Michael," she replied. It's about giving people the courage to see their own potential. That's what I want to do, help them realize that they don't have to prove anything to anyone but themselves. Michael nodded, his eyes filled with quiet pride. You're doing that every day, without even trying. Jessica's thoughts wandered back to the students she had spoken to, the young woman she had helped at the symposium, and the countless others who had found courage in her words. She realized that the journey she had taken wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who had ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or silenced. She had proven that it didn't matter what others thought of you, it was about knowing your own worth and living it fully. One evening, as she was finishing up her latest math problem at the kitchen table, Michael walked in with an envelope in his hand. "This came for you," he said, handing it over with a smile. Jessica looked at the envelope, curious. She opened it carefully, finding an invitation to a national conference on education, where she had been invited to speak about the power of self-confidence and academic achievement. The words on the paper felt surreal. It wasn't just an invitation to speak, it was an opportunity to share her story on a much larger platform, to inspire even more people to step into their own power. She looked up at Michael, her eyes wide with surprise. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Michael smiled and kissed her forehead. "Say yes," he said gently. "This is your moment. You've earned it." The decision was easy. Jessica knew she couldn't turn down the opportunity. She had spent so much of her life hiding, trying to fit into the mold others had set for her. But now, she was no longer hiding. She was ready to stand in the spotlight, to use her voice to make a difference. The conference was a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone in the room who needed to hear her message. As Jessica stood on stage, looking out at the sea of faces before her, she knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. She had come a long way from the woman who once questioned her place in the world. Now, she was the woman who was teaching others to find their place, too. And as she spoke, sharing her story of self-discovery and empowerment, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. She wasn't just sharing a story, she was changing lives, just as hers had been changed. As the audience gave her a standing ovation, Jessica realized that this was the beginning of something much bigger. It wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about leaving a legacy, one that would inspire others to step into their own power and never settle for anything less than their true potential. As the conference ended and Jessica returned to her daily life, the sense of accomplishment continued to fuel her. The applause she had received at the event was not what mattered most. It was the realization that she had spoken not only to inspire others but also to reaffirm the strength she had found within herself. Her journey had come full circle. No longer the quiet woman in the back of the room, she was now someone who had the courage to stand up, speak out, and embrace her own potential. Life at home with Michael remained as supportive as ever. They had both grown, not just in their professional lives but as partners who truly understood one another. Their relationship had deepened, each encouraging the other to be the best version of themselves. One evening, as they shared dinner together, Michael looked across the table at Jessica. "You've made such an impact, Jess," he said softly. "I see it in the way people look at you now. You've become a symbol of strength for so many." Jessica paused, taking in his words. She didn't seek out accolades or praise, but hearing his genuine admiration filled her heart with warmth. "I've always known I could do it," she replied quietly. "It just took a little courage, and the right moment, to show everyone, including myself, what I was capable of." As the months passed, Jessica continued to speak at events, mentor young women, and be an advocate for those who needed to hear that they could break free from the labels others placed on them. She wasn't just speaking about mathematics anymore, she was speaking about life, about the power of believing in oneself. She spoke about the importance of staying true to who you are, no matter the external pressures. One day, Jessica received another unexpected invitation, this time from a group of high school students. They had seen her talk at the conference and wanted her to come speak at their school. This time, the request was simple, just to share her story and inspire them to believe that their dreams were possible, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. Standing before those young faces, Jessica realized that this was her true calling. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone, it was about creating opportunities for others to see their own potential. She spoke from the heart, telling the students about the moments in her life when she had doubted herself, when others had doubted her, and how she had come to understand that the only validation that truly mattered was her own. After her talk, a young girl approached Jessica, her eyes wide with hope. "You've made me believe in myself," she said. "I've always been told I couldn't do this or that, but now I know I can." Jessica smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "You can," she said softly. "You've always been able to." As Jessica left the school that day, she realized that she was no longer the woman who had once hidden in the background, unsure of her place in the world. She was a woman who had embraced her own worth, who had stepped into the light, and who now helped others do the same. The journey had been long, and at times, challenging, but it had led her to this moment. She was no longer just a woman who solved problems, she was a woman who inspired others to believe in themselves, to find their own strength, and to never settle for anything less than what they were truly capable of. And in that realization, Jessica knew that her story was far from over. There was still so much more to do, so many more lives to touch, and she was ready to embrace it all.